Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Let us turn our gaze tonight to a land where the earth swells in great grassy waves, where the horizon is a long, curved line meeting an immense and active sky. This is the land of the Zulu, KwaZulu, the place of heaven. Here, the sky is not a distant ceiling. It is a living membrane, a breathing entity. It speaks. Its language is not of words, but of light and sound, of fire from the clouds and the deep, rolling drumbeat that follows. To the people of these hills, a storm is not a meteorological event. It is a sermon. Lightning is the flash of divine insight, a sudden, brilliant thought from the realm above. And thunder is the voice of the ancestors, not a shout of anger, but the deep, resonant clearing of a collective throat, preparing to impart wisdom, warning, or judgment. For generations, there have been those who dedicated their lives to interpreting this celestial dialogue. The Izanusi, the diviners, the lightning priests, they were the linguists of the heavens. They studied the patterns of clouds as one might study the lines on a palm. They listened to the quality of thunder. Was it a sharp crack, signaling decisive action, or a long, low rumble, speaking of prolonged deliberation among the ancestral spirits? They understood that the weather was not separate from the community's spiritual health. A drought could be caused by a moral failing. A benevolent growing season could be the ancestors' smile. The sky was the most visible page of their sacred text. Tonight, we will follow the thread of this belief through 4 remarkable moments. We will witness a terrifying season when the ancestors fell silent when lightning flashed, but no thunder followed, creating a spiritual drought more profound than any lack of rain. We will learn of a sacred technology, not to ward off lightning, but to invite and direct it, to charge stones with prophetic power. We will meet a child whom the sky seemed to choose, striking him not once, but 7 times, etching maps of future storms onto his very skin, transforming him into a living oracle. And finally, we will see a meeting of worlds, where modern scientists, humbled by a failing forecast, sit down with elder priests, discovering that the ancient ways of listening contained precise data that machines had missed. This is a story about listening, about different kinds of ears, the ears of the spirit, the ears of the body, the ears of technology, all straining to hear the meaning in the roar. It is about the hum of impending rain, the crackle of static before a strike, the silent language of a scar that aches when the pressure drops. As we begin, let us still our own minds. Let us imagine the smell of ozone on the wind, the cool charge in the air that makes the hair on your arms stand up. Let us prepare to listen, as the Zulu have listened for centuries, to the sky that hummed. Let's pause for a moment. The fire crackles gently as the night breathes around us. In the distance, imagine the first faint rumble, felt more in the chest than heard by the ears. The ancestors are stirring. The story begins. Have you ever stood in complete silence, waiting for a sound you knew should be there? That prickling anticipation, that sense of wrongness when it doesn't arrive. Now, imagine that feeling stretched across an entire nation, across a whole season. Imagine the sky itself falling silent. That's where our story begins, in the heart of Zululand, under a sky that had forgotten how to speak. By the end of our journey today, you'll understand how the absence of a single sound, the deep rolling voice of thunder, could trigger a spiritual crisis far deeper than any drought. You'll see how the Zulu people interpreted the sky as silent flashes, not just as a strange weather event, but as a profound and terrifying withholding of ancestral wisdom. It all started subtly, during the high heat of the growing season, a time that should have been full of life and promise. As they always had, the clouds would gather in the afternoon, great, bruised towers of grey and purple piling up over the magnificent Drakensberg Mountains. You could feel the shift in the air. It would grow heavy, thick, almost syrupy, pregnant with the promise of a cleansing downpour. The world seemed to hold its breath. The cattle would grow restless in their kraals, their lowing taking on an anxious edge. The birds, usually so full of song, would fall silent. And then it would come, the lightning. It wasn't a meek little flicker. It was a spectacular, furious display. It forked across the darkening sky in brilliant, jagged veins, first silver, then an electric blue, then a white so blinding it would sear an afterimage onto your vision. For a split second it would illuminate the hills, the huts, the very blades of grass in a sudden, stark snapshot of reality. But then, after the flash, there was nothing. An absolute, deafening void. No deep, booming voice followed. No rolling grumble that you could feel in your bones. The sound that shook the very earth and announced the coming of the rains. The brilliant, violent light was followed only by an eerie, profound silence. At first, people thought their own ears were failing them. Can you imagine the confusion? After a particularly bright flash, they'd look at each other, their faces a mix of awe and bewilderment, a questioning glance, a tilted head. Did you hear that? One might ask, only to be met with a silent shake of the head. But the silence was real, and it was persistent. The lightning was there. It was speaking its language of light, but the thunder, which the Zulu believed to be the very voice of the ancestors, was absent. It was a deeply unsettling paradox. It was as if the sky was baring its teeth in a silent, menacing snarl, but refusing to let out the roar. The rains that sometimes followed these silent displays were a cruel joke mega, hesitant sprinkles that barely dampened the dust. The earth remained parched, cracked, and thirsty. Among the community, a seed of unease began to sprout, but for the priests, the wise ones known as the Izanus, this was a cause for deep and immediate concern. This phenomenon was completely outside of all known tradition, all memory passed down through generations. Lightning without thunder was an omen they couldn't decipher. It was like a royal messenger arriving at the village, holding out a sealed scroll full of vital information, but then refusing to break the seal and read it. The message was clearly there. You could see it in the flash, but its meaning, its wisdom, its warning, was locked away, utterly inaccessible. The consensus began to form, a chilling realization that settled over the people like a shroud. The ancestors, the guardians of the tribe, were showing their displeasure. But in their silence, they were refusing to deign to explain why. This celestial silence didn't just stay in the sky. It descended and seeped into the very fabric of daily life. The people's anxiety became a tangible force, a low hum of fear you could feel in the air. The usual lively chatter in the village square hushed. Conversations would start, then falter, as another silent flash lit the horizon. Mothers kept their children closer to the huts, their games less boisterous. The normal, intricate art of interpreting the sky reading, the direction of a lightning strike, the color of the flash, its frequency, it all became meaningless. It was like having a flood of data without any context, a page of words with no grammar to understand them. The Izanuzi, the spiritual anchors of the community, retreated into deep, urgent consultation. They gathered in the dim light of their huts, the air thick with the scent of sacred herbs. They threw the bones, the traditional method of divination, casting the small, polished ankle bones and shells onto a mat, searching for answers. But the patterns were confused, chaotic. They pointed skyward, acknowledging the source of the problem, but offered no clarity, no path forward. They listened intently to the dreams of the people, which were now filled with vivid, blinding light, but an oppressive, unnerving soundlessness. The entire community was caught in a state of divine suspense, a cosmic waiting game. What had they done to deserve this? Or, perhaps more terrifyingly, what had they failed to do? This silence from the ancestors was a weight heavier than any noise could ever be. It was a judgment without a verdict, a punishment without a stated crime, leaving the people adrift in a sea of guilt and uncertainty. Let's just pause here for a moment. Close your eyes, if you can. Picture the scene. The fire crackles gently beside you, casting dancing shadows. The vast African night breathes around you, cool and ancient. And then, a flash of white light tears across the sky, illuminating everything for a heartbeat. And then, that oppressive, electric silence descends. Feel the held breath of an entire landscape, an entire people, waiting, praying for a voice that does not come. It's a conversation where you can see the other person's lips moving, their face contorted with emotion, but you can't hear a single word. Can you feel that profound sense of isolation? That's the spiritual prison the Zulu people found themselves in. After days and nights of deep meditation, of fasting and fervent appeals, the Isanusi finally emerged from their consultations, their faces etched with a heavy, trembling conclusion. What they had realized was more profound and more frightening than simple anger. This was not mere anger. Anger, they reasoned, had a voice. Anger was the sharp, cracking whip of thunder that splits a tree, a direct and understandable expression of displeasure. No, this was something far more severe. This was withholding. The ancestors had not turned away. In fact, they were observing more intently than ever. But they had chosen to cease their commentary. They were watching the current age unfold its subtle but significant changes in tradition, its quietly forgotten rituals, its slow, creeping moral erosions that no one had thought to address. And they had decided that their wisdom, their guidance, would be wasted if it were spoken into a world that was no longer truly listening. So they were waiting. They were waiting for an acknowledgement from their children on earth. They were waiting for a demonstration that the people still knew how to listen. Not just with their ears to the roar of the storm, but with their hearts and spirits to the silence that lay within it. The problem, the Isanusi declared, was not in the sky. The problem was here, in the spirit of the people on the ground. The lightning was a constant, powerful reminder of the ancestors' presence. They were still there, watching. But the missing thunder, that was the lesson. It was a lesson in their absence, a lesson in what is lost when connection is broken. To restore the divine voice, to bring back the life-giving thunder and the rains it commanded, the people first had to prove they deserved to hear it again. They had to remember how to speak to the sky in the language it has always understood, a language older than words, the language of pure, unadulterated, and humble respect. The task of the Isanusi had profoundly shifted. Their sacred duty was no longer to explain a divine message, but to interpret a deafening absence. The voice of the ancestors, the thunder that once rumbled with guidance and reassurance, had fallen silent. In this unnerving quiet, the Isanusi turned their focus to the only thing that still spoke from the heavens, the silent lightning itself. They began to observe it with a new, almost desperate intensity, seeking meaning in its voiceless flashes. They noticed patterns they had previously overlooked. The bolts didn't just strike randomly. They often forked in a particular, repetitive way. It looked like a root system burrowing deep into the earth in search of water, or like the intricate network of veins mapping a hidden, vital organ within a body. They also saw that the color of this lightning was different. It wasn't the warm, life-giving yellow or brilliant white of fertile storms that promised rain. Instead, it was a cold, sterile, electric blue. This lightning felt investigative, almost clinical. It illuminated the land not with the promise of renewal, but as if it was searching for something, inspecting every detail, and ultimately finding it lacking. This observation led them to a critical next step. They began to correlate the silent flashes with events happening on the ground. A cold blue strike would light up the night sky near an ancestral gravesite that had fallen into neglect, overgrown with weeds and forgotten by the living. Another would flash directly over a field where a bitter boundary dispute had poisoned the relationship between two families, creating a festering wound in the community's heart. It became clear that the lightning wasn't random at all. It seemed to be deliberately highlighting points of spiritual rupture, pinpointing the exact locations where the community's connection to its values and its past had frayed. From this meticulous observation, the Izanusi proposed a radical, transformative idea. The ancestors were not silent because they had abandoned their people or departed from the world. They were silent because they were working. They were using the pure, wordless energy of light to illuminate the problems. The fractures in the social fabric, the forgotten duties and unresolved conflicts that plagued the community. The thunder, the voice of instruction and resolution, would not return until these illuminated faults were painstakingly mended. The sky, in its silent wisdom, was providing a diagnosis in brilliant flashes of light, but it was withholding the prescription, the cure, which had always been delivered in the restorative rumble of thunder. This new interpretation fundamentally dictated the community's response. It was not a time for grand, loud ceremonies, for desperate prayers or ostentatious sacrifices begging for forgiveness. The silence from the sky demanded a different kind of devotion. It called for a period of quiet, meticulous repair. Guided by the Izanusi, the community embarked on a season of remembrance and reconciliation. It was a time for introspection, for looking inward at their own actions and inactions. The work began immediately. Neglected graves were carefully cleaned, the weeds cleared, and heartfelt offerings of food and drink were made, re-establishing the bond of respect between the living and the dead. The Izanosi acted as mediators, sending envoys to resolve long-standing disputes between families and clans. The goal was not to have one side win an argument, but to foster restorative dialogue, to heal the bad blood and knit the community back together. Every night, as families gathered around the flickering warmth of the fire, the elders would tell the stories of the ancestors. But these were not just for entertainment. Each story was chosen as a lesson, a piece of instruction. The names and deeds of those who came before were not just remembered as historical facts. They were felt in the hearts of the listeners, their wisdom becoming a living presence in the community once more. Through these quiet, deliberate actions, the people were demonstrating their worthiness. They were showing the heavens that they did not need to be told what was wrong. They could see the light of the problem for themselves, even without the guiding voice of thunder pointing it out. Let's pause here for a moment. Imagine this scene. The fire crackles softly in the center of the hut, its light dancing on the faces of the young and old. The vast, dark night breathes around them. A living entity. Outside, the silent sky flashes intermittently, like a celestial lighthouse. This is the quiet work of mending. It's a community auditing its own soul, guided not by booming commands, but by silent, probing searchlights from above. It's a profound act of collective responsibility, undertaken in humility and hope. As this season of repair continued, the atmosphere in the land began to change. Subtly at first, but undeniably. This change happened even before the weather did. A certain tension that had gripped the hills and valleys began to ease. A collective humility, a sense of shared purpose and responsibility settled over the people. The community's relationship with the sky was no longer one of demand and expectation. A child crying out, "Give us rain, give us what we want." Instead, it transformed into one of presentation, a humble offering. "See, we are trying. We are doing the work." Finally, the Izanusi declared that the time was right. They orchestrated a great, silent gathering. On a chosen evening, as the familiar electric tension began to build in the atmosphere, signaling another night of silent storms, the people did not gather to sing loud praises or perform energetic dances. Instead, they walked in quiet procession to a high ridge overlooking their lands. They sat in silent, orderly rows, a congregation of souls facing the heavens. They offered nothing more than their presence, their unified stillness as testimony to their efforts. As the cold, blue lightning began its silent dance across the sky, they looked up, and in the quiet chambers of their minds, they all spoke the same words. "We see the light. We see the fractures it has shown us. We are fixing what it has revealed. We are ready to listen again." It was a vigil of waiting, but they were not waiting for rain. Not directly, they were waiting for the return of a voice. They were proving to the ancestors and to themselves that they could endure the suspense, that their faith was not shallow or dependent on constant reassurance. They were learning to listen to the silence itself, to find meaning and guidance within the great cosmic quiet, and in doing so, they hoped, with all their hearts, that they were finally making themselves worthy of once again hearing the magnificent, life-affirming roar of the thunder. The work was done. The offerings were made, not in sound, but in deed. Now, all that was left was to wait and to listen to the silence. From dusk until the deepest part of the night, a great silent gathering took place. Thousands of people sat on the cool grass of the hillside, their faces turned upward, their eyes fixed on the celestial drama unfolding above. The lightning continued its silent, magnificent performance. It flashed and it forked, painting the undersides of the clouds with an ethereal light, illuminating them from within. But the people did not flinch. They didn't cower or look away. They met the silent light with their own silent testimony. Their collective presence formed a living altar, a testament to their repaired unity, their remembered respect for the old ways. As the night reached its absolute peak, its darkest and most profound moment, the head Isanusi stood. He was a man so old he seemed carved from the very same ancient stone as the hills surrounding them. He didn't need to raise his voice. He spoke in a low, resonant tone that seemed to ride on the charged air, carried effortlessly to every ear. He didn't petition the sky. He didn't beg or plead. He narrated the actions the people had taken. He told of the graves that had been tended, the family disputes that had been settled, the forgotten stories that were retold around evening fires. He spoke to the sky as one might speak to a respected elder who has been quiet for a very long time, simply updating them on the affairs of the home in a tone of humble, factual report. "You showed us the broken boundary with your light," he intoned, his voice steady. "See, the stones have been reset, and the families now share water from the same gourd again. You illuminated the forgotten resting place. See, the grass is trimmed, and the memory of those who lie there is fresh on our tongues." It was a meticulous audit of spiritual repair, a detailed accounting of mended relationships and honored traditions, all submitted for celestial review. Then he stopped speaking. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It was thicker, heavier, filled with a palpable sense of anticipation. Every person in the vast crowd held their breath. The lightning itself seemed to pause, as if the sky was leaning in, listening, considering the report it had just received. For a long, stretching moment, there was nothing. Nothing but the soft sigh of the wind whispering through the tall grass. And then something shifted. A single, small cloud, separate from the main turbulent mass, drifted until it was directly overhead. A tiny, brilliant spark flickered within it, not a great fork of lightning. Just a quick, contained flash, like a single thought, and then a sound. It wasn't the great, booming crack of a full thunderclap that could split the air. No, this was a soft, deep grumble, a low, rolling murmur, like a giant stirring in its sleep. It was faint, so faint you might have missed it if you weren't listening with your entire being. But it was unmistakable. It was thunder. A collective shiver passed through the crowd. It wasn't a shiver of fear, but one of profound, bone-deep relief. It wasn't the full voice of the ancestors, not the powerful conversation they had once known, but it was a vocalization. It was a sign that the oppressive, unnerving silence had finally been broken. The ancestors had not yet begun to speak in full sentences, but it was as if they had cleared their throats, preparing to. The old Isanusi, the weight of his people's hope on his shoulders, sank slowly to his knees. Tears cut clean paths through the dust on his weathered cheeks, shining in the distant, soft flashes of light. The people remained perfectly still, letting that soft, distant rumble wash over them, a balm on their anxious souls. It was the most beautiful sound they had ever heard. It meant they were being heard. It meant the covenant of communication, the sacred link between earth and sky, was re-establishing itself. Let's pause here for a moment. Imagine that scene. The fire crackles gently beside us as the night breathes softly around this story. That first tentative rumble after a long, deafening season of silence. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't the end of the problem, but it was a sign. It was a connection. And isn't that where the deepest comfort so often lies? Not when a problem is instantly solved, but in that moment we realize we are no longer alone with it. The moment we know that connection, however fragile, has been restored. In the days that followed that sacred night, the thunder returned, but it did so slowly, cautiously. It was like a man recovering his voice after a long and serious illness. At first, there were only those low, distant rumbles, echoes of that first beautiful sound. Then, as the days turned, sharper cracks began to punctuate the afternoons. And then, finally, the full-throated, rolling peals of thunder they had missed so dearly returned, shaking the valley to its foundations. It was a joyous, glorious sound, and with the thunder came the rain. This wasn't the scant, teasing showers they had endured before. Showers that barely wet the dust. This was a deep, drenching, forgiving downpour. It soaked the earth to its very core, quenching a thirst that was both physical and spiritual. The drought broke, the rivers began to run, the fields turned green, and life returned to the valley in all its abundance. But the people never forgot the lesson of the silent lightning. They remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling of being cut off. They now understood that the sky's conversation was a profound privilege, not a guarantee. They had learned to read the flashes as well as listen for the roar. The silence had taught them a new language, and through that hardship they had discovered a new, deeper layer to their relationship with the ancestors and the world around them. Sometimes, they learned, the most important communication happens in what is not said, and sometimes the most appropriate response is not a desperate plea, but a quiet, steadfast demonstration of worthiness. The year without thunder was never forgotten. It became a foundational story, a powerful reference point for all future generations on how to listen when the sky grows quiet, and how to act to restore the sacred conversation. Let us shift from that quiet introspection to a deliberate, almost audacious dialogue with the sky's most violent and spectacular expression, lightning. For the Zulu people, the relationship with this force was never one of simple, paralyzing fear. It was a complex tapestry woven with threads of immense respect, deep understanding, and eventually a daring attempt at collaboration. It was a relationship that sought to harness, not just hide from, the raw power of the heavens. This journey begins, as many ancient traditions do, with a quiet, patient observation. Picture a community after a fierce thunderstorm has passed. The air is still thick with the smell of ozone and rain-soaked earth. As people emerge, they might discover a place where the storm's fury had physically touched the land, a rock, or a prominent outcropping that had been struck by lightning. These places were immediately recognized as special. The stones themselves were visibly altered. They were often split clean in two, or webbed with cracks. Along these fractures, you'd find strange, glassy veins, where the intense heat had melted sand and minerals into a substance we now call fulgurite. But the transformation was more than just physical. These stones carried a palpable energy. For days after the storm, even as the surrounding landscape cooled, these lightning-struck rocks remained noticeably warm to the touch. It was as if they had absorbed the fire from the sky and were now slowly, gently releasing it. This wasn't just a curiosity. It had tangible effects. Those who spent time near these stones, or even slept close to them, reported experiencing unusually vivid and chaotic dreams. These weren't ordinary dreams. They were often filled with cryptic, prophetic insights. A herder, perhaps, resting his head against such a stone for a midday nap, might dream of a lion attacking his cattle on a distant, unseen ridge. Waking with a sense of unease, he would rush to check his herd and find the vision to be chillingly accurate. Stories like these multiplied, solidifying the belief that these stones were not mere rocks anymore. They became known as Amach Anamoya, name that translates to stones with spirit, or more literally, stones with wind. The term Umoya refers to a divine, life-giving energy, a spiritual wind that animates all things. The belief was that these stones had captured a fragment of the sky's Umoya during the lightning strike. They held this celestial energy captive, and it was this power that was slowly seeping out, manifesting as warmth, strange feelings, and most importantly, prophetic power. These were not objects of worship in the way one might worship a deity. They were revered, yes, but they were also seen as powerful tools. The Izanusi, the spiritual diviners and healers of the community, would carefully collect small fragments from these naturally charged stones. They would carry them in leather pouches, using them as potent focal points during difficult divination rituals. When a question was particularly complex, or the future seemed especially murky, the Isanusi would hold one of these fragments, drawing on its stored energy to clear their vision and receive clearer guidance. However, there was a fundamental problem with this method. It was entirely passive. The community had to wait for nature to act. They were dependent on the random, unpredictable whims of the lightning. The supply of these powerful tools was dictated by chance. And so, a revolutionary idea began to form. A question born of both spiritual need and practical ingenuity. Could one invite the lightning? Could one create a designated target, guiding the sky's fire to a specific, chosen stone? Could they, in essence, create a battery of divine insight on demand? This was the intellectual and spiritual seed that grew into a practice we can call the lightning rod ritual. But it's crucial to understand that its purpose was the absolute inverse of the modern lightning rod invented by Benjamin Franklin. Franklin's invention was designed for protection, to divert dangerous electrical energy away from valuable structures and into the harmless ground. The Zulu ritual was about attraction. It was not about steering power away from something precious, but about drawing it towards something meticulously prepared. The goal was to create a sacred receptacle, a stone that would be deliberately charged with the sky's fire. By doing this, its prophetic power would be made exceptionally potent, reliable, and readily available to the kingdom's leadership for its most pressing and urgent questions. This was an act of sacred engineering. It was like building a bridge, not to cross a river, but to stand directly in the path of a waterfall, hoping to channel its immense force into a single, consecrated vessel. The creation of these sacred vessels was a process steeped in ritual and intention from the very beginning. The stones themselves were not just any rocks picked from a field. They were painstakingly selected from the beds of specific, spiritually significant rivers. Like the famed Umfolozi River, these rivers were known for the clarity of their water and their deep connection to the spiritual life of the kingdom. A stone chosen from such a place was already considered to be partially purified. The physical requirements were just as strict. The stones had to be perfectly oval or round, smooth to the touch, and completely free of any pre-existing cracks or imperfections. Their flawless shape, smoothed over centuries by the patient flow of water, was itself a symbol of natural perfection, patience, and endurance qualities that the vessel was intended to embody. Once a suitable stone was found, the preparation phase began. This was not a quick process. The stone was inscribed with a series of tiny, intricate symbols. These weren't carved with sharp metal tools. Instead, the Isanusi would use a harder, pointed stone to meticulously peck the marks onto the surface. This was a slow, meditative, and physically demanding process. Each tiny mark was an act of focused will, a prayer hammered into the very substance of the rock. The process could take days or even weeks, during which the carver imbued the stone with their focused intent and spiritual energy. Through this ritual labor, the stone was transformed. It was no longer a simple, natural object. It had become a prepared vessel, a carefully crafted spiritual instrument, patiently awaiting its final consecration, its baptism by celestial fire. The ritual itself was a dramatic and highly dangerous undertaking. It was performed by a specialized Isanusi, known as an Inyanga Zulu, or a heaven herd. These individuals were masters of weather lore and were believed to have a special connection to the sky. When a powerful thunderstorm was seen gathering on the horizon, the Inyanga Zulu would prepare. The inscribed stone would be taken to a high exposed place, a hilltop, or a prominent ridge, a place that naturally called to the lightning. The location was critical. It had to be a place where the boundary between earth and sky felt thin. The stone would be placed on a specially prepared bed of insulating materials, often specific types of animal hides and sacred herbs. Then, the Inyanga Zulu would erect a kind of antenna. This wasn't a metal rod, but was often a long spear or a specially treated wooden pole, adorned with certain feathers and metal objects known to attract lightning. This rod was not connected to the ground. Instead, it was positioned to guide the strike towards the prepared stone. The heaven herd would then begin a series of deep, resonant chants and invocations, addressing the storm directly, calling upon the sky god, Inkanyamba, to send down a shard of his power. It was a direct address, a negotiation with the storm itself, asking it to accept the offering and charge the vessel. The Inyanga Zulu would stand perilously close, their own life at immense risk, acting as a living conduit of intention between the storm and the stone. When lightning did strike the apparatus, the energy would be channeled into the waiting rock. The resulting explosion of light and sound was seen as the successful transfer of Umoya. The sky had answered. If the Inyanga Zulu survived, they would cautiously approach the stone after the storm passed. The stone would now be intensely hot, often glowing, and sometimes shattered. The pieces, now fully charged, were considered among the most powerful artifacts in the kingdom. These charged fragments were not for common use. They were held in the custody of the king and his highest council of Isan. They were consulted only in times of great crisis, before a major battle, during a severe drought, or when a mysterious plague threatened the people. The divination process using these stones was intense. The Isanusi would enter a deep trance, holding a fragment, allowing its chaotic, powerful energy to flood their consciousness. The visions they received were said to be not just symbolic, but visceral and direct, offering clear guidance from the spirit world. Channeled through the heart of the storm, this practice represents a profound philosophical stance. It is a refusal to be a passive victim of nature's power. It is an assertion of humanity's role as a co-creator, a partner in the cosmic drama. It's a testament to the idea that with enough respect, knowledge, and courage, even the most terrifying forces of the universe can be engaged with, understood, and even collaborated with. It's a powerful lesson in seeing challenges not as insurmountable obstacles, but as sources of immense energy waiting to be harnessed. With the vessel ready, the next step was to forge a path for the sky's energy. This was the work of a specialized artisan, often from a family line tied to metal and fire. The material they chose was copper, not iron. Iron was the metal of war, for the spear and the blade. Copper was different. It felt softer, warmer to the touch. When polished, it shone with a ruddy glow, like a hint of fire captured in a cloud. It was seen as a sympathetic metal, one that had an affinity for the sky's flame. The artisan would smelt and work this copper, hammering it into a long, tapering pole, taller than two men stood on each other's shoulders. This wasn't just a simple pole. It was a ritual object, every inch filled with meaning. Along its length, the artisan would etch intricate patterns. There were spirals that mimicked whirlwinds, zigzags that echoed the very shape of lightning, and symbols representing the key ancestors of the weather. The top was often fashioned into a subtle, open spiral or a cup-like shape, a deliberate invitation. The base was pointed, designed to be driven deep into the earth in a specific, cleared area known as a lightning field, located safely away from any homestead. The connection was vital. The rod was meant to be a conduit, not a final destination. Its purpose was to take the fire from the sky and deliver it directly into the earth. But at the precise point where the prepared sacred stone was placed, the placement of this rod was a science of alignment. It was erected on a small hillock within the lightning field, a natural high point. The inscribed stone was then placed in a shallow depression at its exact base, a depression lined with ash. Ash, the residue of fire, was considered a pure and receptive medium. This whole area was then consecrated by the Isanus, the spiritual specialists. They would circle it, chanting invocations. These weren't commands, but respectful requests. They spoke to the lightning as one might speak to a powerful, wild animal, guiding it towards a prepared trap, not with force, but with a deep understanding of its nature. Great fire of the clouds, a chant might go. Here is a bright path for your descent. Here, at its end, a worthy stone waits to hold a spark of your wisdom for your children below. Let's just pause for a moment. Imagine this scene. The fire crackles gently as the night breathes around us. Picture that lone copper spire standing tall against a darkening, brooding sky. It's a deliberate, shining invitation. Can you feel the tension? The palpable feeling of waiting for that invitation to be accepted by a force that can never be truly controlled, only respectfully courted. This wasn't about defiance. It was about communion. It was an act of profound faith, a bridge built between the earthly and the celestial, using knowledge passed down through generations. The polished copper, catching the last light of day, stands as a beacon of hope and a testament to human ingenuity in the face of nature's awesome power. The air itself feels charged, thick with anticipation. The silence isn't empty. It's filled with the unspoken words of the ritual, the hopes of the community, and the ancient conversation between humanity and the storm. When the storm clouds finally gathered, a watch would be set. The entire community knew the ritual was underway. There was no shelter built near the lightning field. This was not a spectacle for close viewing. The priests and the artisans would observe from a designated ridge far away. Their role, for now, was complete. They had prepared the lure and they had prepared the vessel. The rest was up to the sky. They waited with a mix of dread and exhilaration for the moment when the divine would choose to engage with their humble engineering. They waited for the sky to reach down its finger of fire and touch the copper path they had so carefully built, sending a bolt of pure meaning into the waiting stone below. Every rumble of distant thunder was a potential answer. Every flicker of light in the clouds was a prelude. The fate of their endeavor hung in the balance, entirely in the hands of the very power they sought to understand. This moment of waiting was perhaps the most sacred part of the entire ritual, a profound act of surrender and trust. Imagine standing on a distant ridge, watching a dark, swirling mass of a storm cloud roll in. It's not just any storm, it's an invited tempest. Below, on a small, exposed hillock, a single copper rod points to the sky, a silent challenge to the heavens. The air grows thick, heavy with static that makes the hair on your arms stand on end. There's a palpable hum, a feeling that the world is holding its breath. And then it happens. The connection is both terrifying and utterly sublime. From the watcher's perspective, the scene is almost biblical. The storm approaches the lightning field, and the air crackles with an unseen energy. Then a bolt lances down. This isn't a random, jagged fork of lightning. No, this is a startlingly straight, blinding line of pure energy. A direct conduit from the heart of the cloud to the very tip of that copper rod. The sound is instantaneous and catastrophic. A crack so loud it feels physical, like a giant hand clapping right next to your ear. It's a sound that shakes your bones. This is immediately followed by a sizzling, tearing roar as trillions of joules of energy surge down the rod and explode into the ground at its base. A flash of intense light, a mixture of stark white and electric blue, illuminates the entire hillock. For a fleeting, impossible second, the copper rod itself glows with an internal fire, as if it were forged from sunlight. Then, just as quickly as it began, there is silence and smoke. The aftermath is stark. The rod, often partially melted or twisted by the immense heat and force, stands smoking against the now clearing sky. The immediate area around its base is scorched completely black. The circle of ash that was there before the strike has been vaporized, erased from existence. The ritual is complete. The sky has answered, but the work is far from over. A profound sense of caution settles over the onlookers. No one can approach the site immediately. There's a deep-seated belief that the earth itself is now shocked, humming with a residual power that is too raw, too volatile for human contact. The Izanusi, the shaman priests who orchestrated this event, will wait. They must wait until the next sunrise. They believe this time is crucial. The energy, the celestial fire, needs time to settle into the sacred stone buried at the rod's base. It must cool from its raw, destructive form into something that can be handled, into usable wisdom. As dawn breaks, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, a small procession of the senior priests begins their journey to the field. They move with a deliberate slowness, their bare feet padding softly on the damp earth. This isn't just a walk, it's a sensory experience. They are feeling the ground with their souls, testing it, listening to it. As they get closer to the strike site, many can feel it a strange, tingling vibration that travels up through their feet. A faint echo of the immense power that was unleashed just hours before. The stone is never where they left it. The sheer force of the lightning strike, the explosive release of energy into the ground, almost always throws the stone several feet away from its original position. They search the scorched grass around the base of the rod, and then they find it, resting quietly, blackened, and sometimes even cracked from the ordeal, but always warm. It's not a searing heat, but a deep inner warmth, like holding a small, living creature in your hands. This warmth is the sign they have been waiting for. It is the confirmation of a successful charging. A stone that was found cold would be a failure. It would mean the energy had missed its intended vessel, or that the power had simply dissipated back into the earth, lost forever. The retrieval of the charged stone is a ritual in itself, performed with extreme care and reverence. An Isanusi's hand, often covered in ritual white clay to purify the touch and protect the handler, reaches for the stone, but not directly. They use a thick leather pad to carefully pick up the blackened object from the scorched earth. As they lift it, the stone often steams slightly in the cool morning air, its residual inner heat meeting the dew-laden atmosphere. It is a thing alive with captured fire. The stone is then placed into a special basket, one lined with soft, freshly cut grass to cushion it and honor its sacredness. It is carried back to the shrine, the spiritual heart of the community. There, it will undergo its final preparation. It is not washed with water, which is believed to be too common, too mundane for such a celestial object. Instead, it is bathed in milk. Milk is a symbol of nourishment, of life and purity. This milky bath is meant to gently cool the stone's remaining fire and prepare it for its ultimate purpose, divination. Once prepared, this charged stone becomes the most powerful tool in the diviner's arsenal. It is reserved for the most critical questions, the ones that determine the fate of the entire community. Where should the royal kraal be moved to ensure prosperity? Should the tribe go to war with a neighboring rival? How can they address a spreading sickness that plagues the people? For these monumental decisions, the Isanusi would enter a state of deep meditation with the charged stone. They would hold it in their hands, feeling its persistent, deep warmth. A physical reminder of the sky's power now held captive. They would open their minds, clearing away the noise of the everyday world, and listen. The visions, the feelings, the insights that came during these sessions were not considered mere imagination. They were believed to be direct transmissions from the energy of the lightning itself, a raw piece of the sky, as intent, now grounded, stabilized, and available for human interpretation. Let's just pause for a moment and take that in. Imagine the scene. The fire crackles gently in the hearth as the night breathes softly around us. Think about the feeling of that stone, days after the storm has passed, still holding a tangible warmth. It's a piece of the divine, a fragment of a thunderbolt, harvested from the sky, cooled, and now ready to speak in dreams and visions. It is a stunning testament to the audacity of humanity, the sheer courage it took to try and bottle a storm. This entire practice represented the absolute peak of active engagement with the awesome power of the storm. It was a profound acknowledgement that the sky's power could never be commanded or controlled. You cannot order the lightning, but with the right knowledge, with deep respect, and with precise, unwavering ritual, you could invite it. You could channel it. The charged stone was a bridge, a physical connection between the uncontrollable, terrifying fury of the heavens and the deep-seated human need for guidance, for answers, for a sense of control in an uncertain world. This ritual took the most fearsome aspect of nature and transformed it into a reluctant, but incredibly potent, oracle. and in doing so, it set the stage for an even more direct, even more personal connection with the storm. A connection where the sky chose not just to charge a stone, but to mark a human being. A story for another time. The story of Minthai begins not with a grand prophecy, not with a divine sign whispered in the ear of a wise elder. No, his journey started with something far more raw, more elemental, a simple, terrifying accident. He was just a herd boy, perhaps 8 reigns old, with that quiet, observant nature you often find in those who spend their days with cattle under a wide, silent sky. His world was shaped by the rhythm of grass and grazing, the sudden flight of birds, the slow gathering of clouds on the horizon. His life was a song of the earth. One afternoon, as he led the cattle back towards the safety of the kraal, he felt it. That familiar charge in the air, the prickling sensation on his skin that spoke of a coming storm. He'd felt it before, many times. It was part of the land's language. But this storm was different. It moved with an unnatural, predatory speed. The sky to the west darkened, not gradually, but as if a giant hand were smearing a dark bruise across the heavens. Before he could even begin to urge the cattle into a panicked run, the world simply exploded. There was no sound, not at first, just a searing, blinding whiteness that consumed everything. The light wasn't just in front of him. It was inside his skull, behind his eyes. A force, like a giant's open palm, slapped him from his feet and threw him through the air. He landed in a crumpled heap. The vibrant world gone silent, gone dark. The only thing that registered was the smell, acrid, electric, the scent of ozone and instantly burnt grass. A smell of raw power unleashed. When the other herders found him, guided by the spooked and scattered cattle, he was alive, but only just. He was unconscious, his small body rigid, as if still held in the lightning's grip. And on his skin, something strange was already beginning to form. Small, fern-like red patterns, like the delicate veins of a leaf, were spreading across his shoulder and down his back. It was the path the bolt had taken, leaping from the superheated ground, through his body and back to the sky. These were Lichtenberg figures, the beautiful, brutal, fractal scars left by lightning's fleeting passage over human skin. His recovery was long and deeply strange. For days, he was trapped in a silent, black world, his sight and hearing stolen by the flash. When his senses slowly, tentatively returned, they were not the same. They came back, altered, recalibrated. He would complain to his mother that everything was too loud, every color too bright, as if the world's volume had been turned up to a painful degree. But there was more, much more. He began to experience sensations he could not explain, feelings that had no source in the world he could see or touch. A day before, a soft, gentle rain was due to fall. A dull, persistent ache would bloom in the lightning scars on his back. When a major storm began to gather over the distant, unseen Drakensberg Mountains, a strange buzzing would start in his teeth. A faint, metallic taste would coat his tongue, and a profound, restless energy would surge through him, making sleep utterly impossible. At first, his family thought it was just the lingering shock of the trauma, the ghost of the electricity still haunting his nerves. But the correlations were too precise, too consistent to be dismissed. The boy, they slowly realized, could feel the weather. He could feel it not as a guess or an observation of the clouds, but in his very bones, in his teeth, in the map of scars on his back. The Eisenus, the wise ones, the diviners, were summoned. They came and they examined the boy. They traced the intricate, branching scars that had healed but remained vividly visible, a permanent, terrifying map of the lightning's path across his skin. They listened with rapt attention to his descriptions of the aches in his back and the buzzing in his teeth. They saw the truth in his young, confused eyes. And then they began to test him. Without telling him, they would ask him how he felt on days when they knew from their own ancient knowledge of cloud patterns and wind. Directions that a storm was building far, far away, well beyond the horizon of ordinary perception. And each time he would report the same thing, the buzzing in his teeth, the restless energy. He was never wrong. Slowly, an impossible, awe-inspiring belief began to take hold. The lightning had not just scarred him, it had tuned him. It had left a piece of its own wild, resonant frequency inside him, turning his nervous system into a living barometer, a human lightning detector of exquisite and frightening sensitivity. Let's just pause here for a moment. The fire crackles gently as the deep night breathes around us. Try to imagine the sheer confusion and the profound awe of that child. His own body, once so familiar, now transformed into a strange and alien instrument, playing notes of atmospheric pressure and static electricity that only he could hear. It must have been an incredibly lonely existence, a biological connection to the tumult of the heavens that no one else could ever understand. A secret conversation between his nerves and the clouds. He was not shunned or cast out. This was not a culture that feared the unusual, but one that respected power in all its forms. But he was set apart. The other children, who once ran and played with him in the fields, were now in awe of him, and more than a little afraid. They didn't understand the distant look in his eyes, the way he would stop mid-sentence and cock his head as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. So, Athunzi took to spending more and more of his time with the very old Isanusi, the ones whose eyes held the wisdom of generations. They understood, they knew he was not cursed. He was carrying a burden, yes, but also a profound gift from Nkosi the Zulu, the king of the sky. And so, his true education began. They started to teach him the language to match his strange new sensations. They gave him words for the feelings that had previously been just a confusing jumble of aches and buzzes. They taught him the names of the different clouds, the towering, anvil-headed cumulonimbus that brought the lightning, the wispy cirrus that spoke of changing weather far off. They taught him the meanings of the winds, how a wind from the east carried moisture from the great ocean, how a wind from the west was dry and hot. They told him the ancestral stories of the storms, of the great lightning bird, of the sky gods, whose battles played out in thunder and rain. Through them, he learned to translate the signals his body was constantly receiving. He learned to interpret the specific ache in his scar, not just as pain, but as a prediction of rainfall within 2 days. He learned to differentiate the intensity of the buzz in his teeth, to know if it foretold a distant rumble of thunder or a violent, imminent storm. Amenzi, the boy struck by lightning, was learning to read the messages that the sky was writing directly onto his own nervous system. But his journey was far from over. The sky, it seemed, was not yet done with its calibration of this new human instrument. The first strike, the one that had nearly killed him, the one that had rewired his very being, that was just an introduction. The sky was about to make a second call. Over the next 10 rainy seasons, the sky seemed to have a personal, almost obsessive interest in Mathanzi. Lightning found him 5 more times. And these weren't simple cases of bad luck, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. No, these strikes defied all logic, all probability. They felt intentional. Imagine this. Athunzi is fetching water from a spring. The sky above is a perfect, uninterrupted blue, except for one tiny, solitary cloud that drifts into view, almost like a curious observer. Suddenly, a single, sharp bolt leaps from this small cloud, not hitting Minzi directly, but striking a tree right beside him. The raw energy arcs from the tree, sizzles through the water in the gourd he's holding, and surges into his hand. It's a jolt, a shock, but not the devastating blow of the first strike. It's more like a reminder, a deliberate touch. Another time, a fierce storm is raging outside. Minzy, seeking safety, is asleep inside his hut. He should be protected, shouldn't he? But a bolt of lightning strikes the thatched roof, travels with terrifying precision down the central wooden pole of the hut, and then leaps across the small space to his sleeping mat. Again, the shock is less severe than the first. Almost like the sky was applying a precise, corrective jolt, fine-tuning its connection to him. With each new strike, a new scar was etched onto his body. These weren't ugly, disfiguring marks. They were intricate, branching patterns, like the delicate veins of a leaf or the tributaries of a river. They were Lichtenberg figures, the signature of a lightning strike. One appeared on his thigh, another snaked across his forearm, and a particularly detailed one bloomed on the side of his neck. Minzy was becoming a living tapestry, a human canvas upon which the sky was painting its story. His body was a record of his conversations with the storm, and with each new scar, his strange abilities grew stronger, more detailed, more refined. The ache in his original scar, the one on his back, became a reliable predictor of general rain. It was his baseline, his first level alert. But the newer scars offered more specific information. A tingling sensation in the fresh scar on his leg wasn't just about rain. It signaled hail. A sharp, almost electric pain in the scar on his neck was a warning of something far more dangerous. Dry lightning, the kind that starts fires in a parched landscape with little to no rain to extinguish them. His body was transforming into a detailed, living map of atmospheric phenomena. He didn't need to look at the sky anymore. He could just listen to the language of his own skin. The Izanusi, the wise elders and mystics of his community, noticed something even more profound. It wasn't just that Minzy could feel the weather coming. The scars themselves seemed to change. In the days leading up to a major weather event, the older, silvery lines of his scars would darken, flushing to a faint pink. To a trained eye watching by the warm glow of a fire, the intricate patterns seemed to subtly throb, to almost extend themselves, like the roots of a plant seeking water just before a rain. His body wasn't just a passive sensor anymore. It was actively, visually responding to the atmosphere. It was a living barometer. Then came the seventh and final strike. This one was the most mysterious, the most otherworldly of them all. It happened on a day of perfect, cloudless blue. There was no storm, no wind, not a single cloud to mar the endless expanse of the sky. For 3 days, Amthunzi had been feeling a strange, persistent buzzing in his head, a low-level static that he couldn't shake, even though the weather was calm. He was sitting with the head Isanusi, the most respected of the elders, trying to describe this strange new sensation. As they spoke, there was a sound, not of thunder, but like a vast sheet of cloth being torn in two, directly above the hut, and from the perfectly clear sky, a bolt of what could only be described as sunlight lightninger, shimmering, almost transparent discharge of energy shot down through the smoke hole in the roof. It struck the hard-packed earth floor right between the two men. There was no fire, no heat, no smell of burning. Just a blinding, silent flash and the sudden, clean scent of rain-washed air. Mthunzi felt no shock this time, no jolt of electricity. Instead, he felt a sudden, crystal-clear silence descend upon his mind. The buzzing that had plagued him for 3 days was gone. All the aches, all the tingling, all the pains from his various scars, they all ceased in an instant. And in that moment of profound silence, he knew it wasn't a feeling, a prediction, or a sensation in his skin. It was knowledge, pure, certain, and absolute. He looked across at the old Isanusi, whose face was a mask of awe and shock. and he spoke with an utter certainty he had never possessed before. "A great storm comes from the sea," he said, his voice calm and clear. "It will be here in 4 days. It will bring not rain, but a wind that bends trees and a sound like 1,000 drums." This was a fundamental shift. He was no longer a human barometer, reporting the sensations of his body. He was delivering prophecy. The 7th strike, the silent, sunlit bolt, seemed to have completed a circuit within him. It was as if all the disparate signals from his network of scars, all the aches and tingles, had finally been integrated into a coherent, conscious whole. The sky had finished its work. It had spent years preparing its instrument, and now it had finally forged an oracle. Let's just pause here for a moment. Imagine the scene. The fire crackles softly, the only sound in the sudden stillness of the hut as the night breathes around them. Think about that final, silent strike from a clear sky. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't an accident. It was an initiation. It was the moment the instrument becomes the musician. The moment Mthunzi finally understood the song his body had been humming for all those years. It was the completion of his transformation. From that day forward, Mthunzi's role in his community was formalized. He was given a new name, a title of immense respect, Izathonia Zulu. It means the sky's messenger. He didn't replace the Izanusi or their ancient wisdom. He didn't interpret throne bones or cast lots to see the future. He became their most vital and unique instrument. His work was simpler, more direct. He simply reported what his body, what the sky, knew. His prophecies saved his people time and time again. His warnings allowed the kingdom to move their precious cattle to sheltered valleys before devastating hailstorms. His predictions told them exactly when to harvest their crops, just before the deluges arrived to wash them away. He taught them which days were safe for travel and which days to stay sheltered from the danger of dry lightning. His body, a living record of 7 celestial conversations. Scarred with the language of the heavens, had become the most accurate and revered weather station in all of Zululand. Mthunzi, the boy who was struck by lightning, became the man who spoke for the sky. He was the human embodiment of a profound and powerful truth, that to truly understand the vast, chaotic power of the sky, one must sometimes allow it to write its knowledge directly upon the flesh. Minz's journey into the heart of the kingdom's spiritual and political life was a process of deep solemnity. He wasn't just given a home. He was placed. His homestead was established near the royal kraal, but deliberately set apart on a small hill. From this vantage point, he had an unobstructed, panoramic view of the sky in every direction. This wasn't a place of exile, but a post of observation. His primary duty, his sacred charge, was to listen, not to the wind or the rustling leaves, but to the sensations within his own body, the messages written on his skin. He was to report these internal shifts to the Council of Izanusi, the kingdom's highest spiritual advisors, who would then convey the intelligence to the king. His forecasts were never public spectacles. They were not shouted from the rooftops for all to hear. Instead, they were treated as top-tier strategic intelligence. Imagine this: a crucial military campaign is being planned. The generals and the king need to know the conditions they will face. They wouldn't just look at the clouds, they would consult Mthunzi. Will the rivers be low and fordable, allowing the army to cross swiftly, or will they be swollen and raging? Will a thick morning fog provide the perfect cover for a surprise attack? Or will the conditions be dry and windy, ideal for a strategy that uses fire to scatter the enemy? These were not abstract questions about the weather. They were matters of life and death, of victory and defeat, and the answers were believed to lie within the scarred flesh of one man. The boy who was once struck by lightning had become the kingdom's most vital intelligence asset. The ritual of consulting Minzi was unlike any other form of divination in the land. It was intimate and profoundly quiet. The Izanuzi, the wise ones, would never approach him with direct, clumsy questions. You wouldn't hear them ask Mathunzi, "Will it rain on Tuesday?" Their method was far more subtle, more respectful of the channel they were trying to access. They would bring him into a quiet, sacred space, often under the cloak of night when the world outside was still. There, they would perform a gentle rite. They would anoint his scars, those intricate patterns of lightning, with a light, fragrant oil pressed from the interlazy plant. This plant was believed to enhance spiritual sensitivity, to open the channels between the physical and the unseen worlds. After the anointing, they would simply wait. Silence would fill the space, thick with anticipation. Their focus wasn't on Minzai's face or his words, not at first. With a single, steady flame as their only light source, they would observe his scars. They would watch the flickering light play across the ridges and valleys of his back. It was said, whispered in awe, that just before a major shift in the weather, the fractal patterns would appear to change. The delicate branches of the lightning scars would seem to elongate, to stretch, or even pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible light from beneath the skin. It was as if the patterns themselves were alive, a living map of the coming atmospheric events. During these sessions, Afenzi himself would often drift into a light trance. His eyes would unfocus, and he would begin to speak, his voice soft but clear. He described what he saw in his mind's eye. He didn't just see rain. He saw the shape of the storm, its direction, its unique character, its temper. He spoke of storms as if they were living beings, each with its own personality. Some were young and impulsive, lashing out with sudden, violent fury before quickly moving on. Others were old and grumbling, moving with a deliberate, heavy weight, their reins soaking the earth for days. He was not just predicting the weather, he was channeling the very spirit of the sky. But Methenzi's significance to his people stretched far beyond these practical, meteorological predictions. He became a living symbol, a powerful testament to the covenant between the people and the sky, between the human world and the divine. His very survival, the fact that he lived after being touched by heaven's fire, was seen as undeniable proof of the ancestors' favor, or, at the very least, their profound and active interest in the affairs of the kingdom. His scars were not just a mark of trauma, they were a sacred text written in flesh. They were a more immediate, personal, and tangible testament to divine power than any charged stone or ancient artifact. From time to time, ordinary people might be allowed to glimpse him from a distance. They would see this figure, marked by the heavens, standing on his hill, and they would feel a deep sense of reassurance. The sight of him was a comfort. It meant the line of communication was open. If the sky could speak so directly, so intimately, to one of them, then they were not alone. They were seen, they were heard. Methenzi embodied a radical and beautiful idea that divine wisdom could arrive through the most unexpected and humble of channels. It could come not through a king or a priest, but through the traumatized body of a simple herd boy, transforming his pain into prophecy and his scars into scripture. Let's just pause here for a moment. Picture the scene. The fire crackles softly. The cool night air breathes around the small hut. Inside, there is a focused, reverent silence. A council of wise elders, the Izanusi, are not gazing up at the stars. Their eyes are fixed on a man's skin, reading the future in the texture of his past pain. This is a deeply intimate, profoundly personal form of divination. It suggests a connection where the boundary between the body and the world, between personal history and collective destiny, becomes beautifully and terrifyingly thin. The past, etched in scars, becomes the key to unlocking the future. and Z lived a long and impactful life. For decades, his unique connection to the atmosphere guided his kingdom through countless climatic shifts. The intelligence he provided helped them navigate seasons of plenty and seasons of struggle. As he grew older, a fascinating change occurred in his predictions. They became less about the immediate, short-term events, the next week's storm, or a sudden burst of wind. Instead, his body began to register longer, deeper patterns. He would speak of subtle shifts in the timing of the rainy seasons, of changes that would unfold, not over days, but over years. He issued warnings of multi-year droughts long before the first signs of dryness appeared on the land. It was as if his body, which had once been an acute, short-term detector, was now maturing into a chronicler of entire climatic epochs. Its memory holding the slow, grand rhythms of the sky. When he finally passed away, it was a moment of great significance. He had spent his life as a bridge, a messenger between the earth and the sky. And now he was joining the ancestors with whom he had so directly communicated. In the wake of his death, a strange and memorable event occurred. It was said that a peculiar, windless calm settled over all of Zululand. For 7 full days, the air was still. Not a leaf stirred. It was as if the sky itself, the very entity he had listened to for a lifetime, was observing a profound moment of silence for its lost messenger. But the knowledge, the unique wisdom of reading the sky through the human body, did not die with Mythenzi. It couldn't be buried. It transformed, flowing into the rich currents of oral tradition. It became a legend, a story told around fires for generations. It was a tale of a boy, marked by lightning, who learned to speak the sky's language. And centuries later, this very legend, this piece of folklore, would capture the imagination of men who studied the sky with very different tools, with instruments of glass and metal, with charts and with data. This ancient, embodied knowledge would eventually lead to an unexpected and at times awkward collaboration, proving that wisdom can be found in the most surprising of places. Centuries rolled by, and the green, rolling hills of Zululand began to tell a new story. Alongside the traditional homesteads, the landscape was now punctuated by the gleaming white of satellite dishes and the stark silhouettes of Doppler radar towers. The South African Weather Service had established a regional office right here. In the heart of this ancient land, its mission to tame the volatile local climate with the power of modern science. The meteorologists, armed with their complex models and powerful algorithms, were confident. They believed in their data, in the logic of their predictions. But the sky over Zulu was not a simple equation to be solved. It was a stubborn, complex poet, one that refused to be fully captured by mere numbers and code. And then came the crisis, a drought. This wasn't the usual seasonal dry spell that everyone was accustomed to. This was a profound, soul-crushing failure of the rains that had stretched on for 2 long years. Reservoir levels plummeted, revealing cracked earth where water once shimmered. Crops withered and died in the fields, turning vast stretches of once fertile land into a brittle, brown expanse. The sophisticated weather models, fed with a constant stream of global data, kept predicting a break in the drought. Forecasts would appear on screens, promising a 60% chance of scattered showers, offering a glimmer of hope that was always snatched away. Instead of life-giving rain, these predictions yielded only a mocking, relentless dry heat. The scientists grew increasingly frustrated. Their multi-million rand technology, the very symbol of human progress and understanding, was failing them, and they didn't know why. In the midst of this professional crisis, the head meteorologist, a pragmatic and dedicated man named Dr. Kumalo, began to hear strange and curious reports from his field staff. Down in the villages, nestled in the shadow of the mighty Drakensberg Mountains, People were operating on a completely different set of information. They were making decisions that seemed to fly in the face of all official guidance. They were planting specific, drought-resistant varieties of sorghum, not because they were anticipating rain, but in a stoic resignation of its continued absence. They were deepening their wells, meticulously timing their labor based on schedules that had absolutely no correlation with the official monthly outlooks issued by his office. When Kumalo pressed his staff for an explanation, the answers he received were baffling. He was told things like, "The Izanusi said the ancestors are holding the rain in the mountains until the new moon of the 3rd month." Or he would hear, "The oracle's great-grandson. He says the ache in his old knee scar is a dry ache, not a rain ache." At first, Kumalo, a man of science and logic, dismissed it all as mere superstition, the lingering echoes of a bygone era. It was folklore, nothing more. But the correlation was persistent, nagging at the edges of his scientific certainty. The traditional predictions, though they were always couched in spiritual and ancestral terms, were proving to be disturbingly more accurate in their outcomes than his entire Stativire system. The old ways were outperforming the new, swallowing his professional pride, a difficult pill for any scientist. Kumalo made a decision that would send ripples through his entire community. He decided to investigate. He needed to understand what was happening, how these seemingly archaic methods could be so effective. He drafted a formal request for a meeting with the Council of Elder Isanusi, the traditional diviners and healers of the Zulu people. The request caused an immediate stir in both communities, the scientific and the traditional. Among his colleagues, the scientists, it was seen as a potential public relations disaster, a desperate lapse in judgment from a man under pressure. It was an admission of failure, a step backward into the very superstitions science was meant to overcome. Meanwhile, among the elders, the request was met with a different kind of surprise. It was a moment of long-awaited, if wary, recognition, a sign that perhaps the world of the ancestors and the world of machines could finally speak to one another. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a compromise intended to bridge the vast cultural gap between the two parties. They gathered in a simple, brick community hall. On one side of the room sat Dr. Kumalo, dressed in his neat collared shirt and slacks. Before him, on the table, lay his tools, a laptop humming quietly and a stack of printed charts filled with graphs and satellite images. On the other side, facing him, sat 3 elder Izanusi. Their presence was a stark contrast. They were adorned in traditional hides and intricate beadwork, their faces etched with the wisdom of generations. With them, they brought their own instruments, a worn leather pouch containing a set of davening bones, a small, dark stone that seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, and a silent, elderly man. He was introduced simply as Mandla, the great-grandson of the legendary Mitsei. On Mandla's own wrist, a faint, silvery pattern, a Lichtenberg figure, marked him as someone who had a unique and intimate relationship with the sky's fire. The air in the hall was thick, heavy with mutual skepticism and a profound, almost unbridgeable, cultural distance. Dr. Kumalo, ever the professional, began the proceedings. He stood and, in simple, carefully chosen terms, began to explain the science of his work. He described how Doppler radar worked, how it sent out waves to detect moisture in the atmosphere. He projected images from his laptop onto the wall, showing the complex swirls of approaching weather systems color-coded to represent intensity and probability. He spoke about algorithms and data points, about atmospheric pressure and wind shear. The elders listened politely, their expressions unreadable, their deep-set eyes following his every move. They offered no interruptions, no questions, just a deep, patient silence. When Kumalo finished his presentation and sat down, the silence stretched on for a long moment. Then, the eldest of the Isanusi, a man whose skin was as wrinkled as a dried riverbed, finally spoke. His voice was low and gravelly, yet it filled the room with an undeniable authority. "Your machine," he said, gesturing towards Kumalo's laptop with a slight nod of his head, "sees the body of the storm." He paused, letting his words settle in the quiet hall. "We," he continued, placing a hand on his own chest, "we listen for its intention long before it even begins to form." He then gestured to Mandla, the quiet man with the scarred wrist. Mandla's great-grandfather, Minzi, was a sky reader. He was struck by lightning as a young man, but he lived. The strike did not take his life. It gave him a gift. It opened a channel. He could feel the lightning building in the air days before a storm. He could feel the thirst of the land in his own bones. His scar, the elder explained, pointing to Mandla's wrist, is not just a mark of injury, it is an inheritance, a connection. When the air is heavy with the promise of rain, the scar tingles and warms. When the sky is withholding its gift, as it is now, the scar is cold and it aches with a dry pain. It is a language, Doctor, that your machines do not speak. Another Isanusi then opened the leather pouch and gently spilled a collection of bones, shells, and carved wooden pieces onto a mat on the floor. "These are not just bones," she explained, her voice softer than the first elder's. "Each one holds a story, a piece of the great memory of our people and our land. When we cast them, we are not predicting the future. We are reading the present in all its depth. We are asking the ancestors, who have seen countless seasons of drought and flood, what the land is telling us now. They tell us of the rhythms, the deep, slow rhythms that your daily forecasts miss. They speak of a 2-year cycle of heat, followed by a period of cleansing fires, and only then, the return of the nourishing rains. Your machines look for rain tomorrow. We are preparing for the season after next." Kumalo listened, his scientific mind racing to process this information. It wasn't data in any form he recognized. It was narrative, it was biology, it was memory. It was a holistic system of knowledge, passed down through bodies and stories, not through hard drives and servers. He began to see that they weren't just looking at the sky. They were in a conversation with the entire ecosystem. The behavior of ants, the flowering of certain plants, the patterns of bird migration, all were data points in their vast, living model. He had come here expecting superstition, but what he found was a different kind of science. A science woven into the very fabric of the culture and the land itself. His frustration began to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of humility and a spark of genuine curiosity. He realized his machines saw the storm's body, its physical manifestation, but these elders, they understood its spirit, its intention, its place in a much grander story. The path forward, he began to suspect, was not about choosing one way over the other, but about finding a way to listen to both. What followed was a symphony of clashing epistemologies. Kumalo, our meteorologist, pointed to a blob of green moving towards the coast on his radar screen. "This shows moisture. It should bring rain right here in about 18 hours. But the elder Isanusi, the traditional diviner, just shook his head slowly. He gestured to his grandson, Mandla. "His wrist has been quiet. No buzzing. The storm you see on your screen," he said with calm certainty, "will turn to the south. It will rain on the ocean." Kumalo was incredulous. How can a scar on a wrist possibly know the path of a weather system hundreds of kilometers away? Mandla spoke softly, his voice barely a whisper above the hum of the laptop. "It's not the scar that knows. It's the memory in the blood. The lightning that marked my great-grandfather left a kind of tuning. It runs in our family line. weaker now, but it's still there. He pointed a finger at the screen, his gaze distant. That storm, it feels indecisive. It has no core. It will scatter. This was a clash of worlds. On one side, satellite data, predictive algorithms, and the cold, hard logic of atmospheric science. On the other, ancestral memory, inherited sensitivity, and a deep, intuitive connection to the land. Kumalo, a man of science, found himself at a crossroads. He was seeing a forecast, not of data, but of lineage. Frustrated, but also deeply fascinated, Kumalo shifted his approach. He decided to stop arguing and start listening. He asked about their methods, their indicators. What did they see that his instruments couldn't measure? The Izanusi began to describe a world of signs invisible to Kumalo's scientific eye. He spoke of the specific, frantic way ants would rebuild their mounds just before a downpour. This wasn't just random insect behavior. It was a clear signal of a rapid drop in barometric pressure. The ants felt it coming and were sealing their home against the flood. He talked about the altitude at which certain hawks flew, not just soaring for pleasure, but indicating distinct thermal layers in the atmosphere. Their flight patterns were a living, breathing weather balloon. Then there was the flowering pattern of the imfefo plant. The elders knew it always bloomed exactly 7 weeks before the first reliable summer rains. Think about that. Not a guess, not a hope, but a precise botanical clock, perfectly synchronized with the seasonal shift. They even had their own names for clouds, which were far more descriptive than the Latin terms Cumulo used. They didn't see cumulonimbus or cirrus. They saw the buffalo herd cloud, a wide, low, dark mass that moved slowly and promised a steady, soaking rain. Or they saw the spearhead cloud, thin, high, and sharp, a clear sign of dry wind that would push any moisture away. As he listened, Kumulo's scientist mind began to whir. These weren't just myths or folk tales. These were longitudinal, qualitative observations, meticulously recorded and passed down over countless generations. It was a vast, living database of phenology and biometeorology. The stories were just the packaging, the cultural framework for storing complex scientific information. The idea of ancestors holding the rain, which had sounded like pure superstition, suddenly clicked into place. It was a beautiful, poetic way to describe a persistent high-pressure system that stalls over the land, preventing rain-bearing clouds from moving in. And Mandler's aching scar, what if it wasn't just an old wound? What if it was a biological sensitivity to minute changes in atmospheric electrical potential, the kind of charge that builds in the air before a storm? Suddenly, the impossible started to seem plausible. Science and tradition weren't opposites. They were just two different languages trying to describe the same truth. Let's pause here for a moment. The fire crackles gently in the hearth, and the deep, quiet breath of the African night surrounds us. Imagine that moment of cognitive shift. That electrifying realization when something you dismissed as superstition reveals itself as deeply observed science, just wrapped in a different narrative. It's a moment that changes how you see the world. The most profound moment of the night was yet to come. The elder reached into a small leather pouch and produced a small, dark, charged stone, smooth from generations of handling. He explained its purpose. It wasn't a literal battery or a magical charm. It was a focal point, a tool for interpreting the energy of the coming season. Holding the stone gently in his palm, he began to describe the coming months. He didn't speak in inches of rain or degrees of temperature. He spoke in metaphors. He described a short, sharp breath of rain in early spring, followed by a long holding of breath until the deep summer. A quick burst of life, then a period of waiting, of tension, before the true release. On a whim, throwing caution to the wind, Kumalo pulled up the long-term seasonal forecast models on his laptop. The complex charts and graphs, the product of supercomputers and global datasets, painted a picture. And as he stared at the screen, a chill ran down his spine. The Isanusi's poetic description matched the model's prediction almost exactly. The data predicted early, scattered showers, not enough to break the dry spell, followed by a stronger, delayed monsoon system that would arrive much later in the season. A short breath, then a long hold. The methods were alien to each other. A sacred stone versus a supercomputer. Ancestral wisdom versus satellite imagery. But the conclusions were converging. They were both, in their own ways, listening to the same humming sky. The challenge was never about which system was right or wrong. It was about seeing the value in both. It was about understanding that human knowledge takes many forms. The real task, Kumalo realized, was to build a translator. To create a bridge between these two powerful ways of knowing, so they could work together, not in opposition. To combine the precision of modern science with the deep, generational wisdom of the land. That night, in that small community hall, something incredible began. Not just a weather forecast, but a new way of seeing the world. A dialogue that could change everything. The collaboration that grew between Kumalo and the Isanusi was a hesitant and practical one. The collaboration that grew between Kumalo and the Isanusi was a hesitant and practical one. Kumalo didn't try to teach the traditional healers how to code. They didn't ask him to throw bones. Instead, they established a simple weekly meeting. Kumalo would come prepared with all the modern tools of his trade. Satellite images, radar data, and the latest numerical model outputs. Then, the elders and Mandla would offer their own readings of the same period. At first, it was just about comparing notes, a kind of polite, if skeptical, exchange. The scientists would privately scoff when Mandla looked at a system their models showed as strong and predicted a storm of noise but little water. But then, when that very system produced a spectacular display of thunder and lightning but dropped only 2 millimeters of rain, the scoffing stopped. Suddenly, the scientists were paying much closer attention. They started to build a bridge between their two worlds. On a whiteboard in their modern weather office, you could see this new language taking shape. On one side, you had the scientific terms. Low pressure system, 500 millibar jet. On the other, the Zulu terms. Imvula Inkulu, meaning big rain, and Isi Vongu, a whirlwind. Slowly but surely, arrows began to connect these concepts, linking the language of algorithms to the language of ancestors. From this, a truly hybrid system began to emerge. The numerical models were excellent at providing the broad canvas, the large-scale movements of continental pressure systems. The temperature anomalies stretching across the ocean, but the traditional knowledge provided the fine brushwork. It added the crucial details, the localized intensity of a storm, the likelihood of dry lightning versus a good, soaking rain. It could even help pinpoint the timing down to a specific day, based on subtle signs like animal behavior or even bodily sensations. Mandla's old scar on his wrist, the one from the lightning strike, became a qualitative check on the quantitative electrical field measurements from their high-tech sensors. The behavior of ants, which the Isanusi had observed for generations, became a ground truth verification for their expensive soil moisture probes. One system validated the other, creating a richer, more accurate picture. Then came the day they issued their first official joint advisory to the local farming community. It was a strange document, unlike any weather forecast seen before. It contained all the standard information you'd expect. Probability percentages, millimeter predictions for rainfall. But at the bottom, there was a new, short section in plain language simply titled Traditional Indicators. It read something like this: Isalukezi birds are building their nests low in the trees, indicating calm winds are expected. The Infefo flower has been observed blooming, meaning the first summer rains are approximately 7 weeks away. Local sensitivity reports suggest a higher probability of dry lightning in the eastern valleys. The farmers, people whose families had trusted the wisdom of the ancestors long before they ever trusted satellites, paid keen attention. They read both parts of the advisory, the scientific and the traditional land. They acted on this new, hybrid advice. The results were markedly better than anything they had experienced before. Their crop yields improved, and they were better prepared for the unpredictable turns of the weather. Let's just pause here for a moment. Picture it, the quiet crackle of a fire under the vast African night sky. This story isn't about a dramatic, world-changing invention. It's about a humble, practical fusion of worlds. It's about creating a forecast that speaks in two dialects, honoring both the cold, hard data of the algorithm and the intuitive ache in an old scar. It's a new kind of wisdom, born not from a single stroke of genius, but from the humility of failed technology and the deep, enduring patience of tradition. This remarkable collaboration didn't make international headlines. It wasn't featured in glossy scientific journals. It was a quiet, local innovation, born out of necessity and mutual respect. But what it represented was a profound reconciliation. It was an acknowledgement that the sky hums on many different frequencies. The sophisticated radar dish hears one range of those frequencies, but the human nervous system, finely attuned by generations of lived experience and, in Mandler's case, even by a direct strike from the heavens, hears another range entirely. The meteorologists, with all their degrees and technology, learned to respect the data that was embedded not in spreadsheets, but in story, in sensation, in the collective memory of a people. They learned that a grandmother's saying about the wind wasn't just folklore. It was a data point, refined over centuries of observation. And on the other side, the Izanosi saw their ancestral knowledge, which had been passed down orally for generations, validated in a new and powerful way. They saw that their deep connection to the land wasn't just a spiritual belief, but a verifiable, scientific reality. Their wisdom was given a new platform, a new language to reach more people and have an even greater impact. Together, they simply became better listeners. They learned to listen not just to their own instruments or their own traditions, but to each other. They proved that truly understanding the weather, that great ongoing conversation between the earth and the sky, requires all kinds of ears. It requires the mechanical ears of radar and satellites, the spiritual ears of shamans and healers, and even the scarred skin of an oracle's descendant, still humming with the memory of a fire that fell from the clouds. And so, our journey beneath the humming sky comes to a gentle close. The embers of our fire are low, their light soft, like the last echo of distant thunder. We have traveled far together, haven't we? From a terrifying silence, through rituals of sacred invitation, to a body inscribed by lightning, and finally to a room where satellite images meet bone-throwing rituals. We have followed not just a story, but a way of listening, a way of being in the world. The Zulu understanding of the storm as divine speech, as a communication from the heavens, was never a primitive fancy. It was, and is, a sophisticated philosophical stance. It is a worldview built on the profound idea that the universe is communicative, that nature is purposeful, and that wisdom flows through every medium imaginable, through the crack of thunder, the pattern of a scar, the seemingly random behavior of an ant, or even the persistent ache in an old man's bones. The Izanusi, the storm diviners, were not merely superstitious priests lost in ancient dogma. They were masterful interpreters of a complex, living text. A text written in wind, in cloud, and in brilliant, terrifying light. They were scholars of the sky, reading a language that many of us have long since forgotten. Think back to the tale of Menzi, the boy struck not once, not twice, but 7 times by lightning. His story is a powerful lesson in resilience and transformation. It shows us how the most traumatic, the most shattering events can, in rare and sacred instances, rewire a person. They can turn a simple human being into a bridge between realms, transforming unimaginable suffering into a life of service, and turning scars into a form of scripture. Mithunzi's life became a testament to the idea that the cosmos sometimes chooses the most unexpected vessels to carry its most important messages. He was a living conduit, a walking, talking message from the sky itself. His body, marked by the heavens, became a map for his community, a source of guidance and wisdom. His survival was not just a miracle, it was a consecration. And then there's the modern collaboration we witnessed. It was awkward at first, wasn't it? Hesitant, full of misunderstandings and mistrust. But ultimately, it was fruitful. And in its success, it offers a hopeful parable for our own fractured age. It shows us that different ways of knowing need not be at war. The quantitative and the qualitative, the empirical and the experiential can converse. The cold, hard data from a radar screen and the ancient wisdom of a ritual can, together, hear the sky's song more completely than either could alone. The goal isn't for science to conquer tradition or for tradition to dismiss science. The goal is for both to hum in harmony, to create a richer, more nuanced forecast, not just for the weather, but for the human heart as it navigates an increasingly uncertain world. It's about finding a synthesis, a third way that honors all forms of knowledge. This is the challenge of our time, to hold multiple truths at once, to respect the satellite and the shaman, the algorithm and the ancestor. It requires a humility that our modern world often discourages, a willingness to say, I don't know, but perhaps you do. Let's learn from each other. This collaboration between the meteorologists and the Izbanosi was more than just a practical experiment. It was a philosophical statement. It was an act of peacemaking between worlds of thought that have been in conflict for centuries. And in their shared pursuit of understanding the storm, they found a shared humanity. They discovered that their ultimate goal was the same: to protect life, to offer guidance, and to make sense of the powerful forces that shape our existence. As the final wisps of smoke rise from our fire, drifting up towards the vast, star-dusted canopy above, let's hold on to the central truth of this night. The sky is always speaking, always. It may roar in the terrifying majesty of thunder, or it might whisper in a subtle change of atmospheric pressure. It might even hum in the silent, electric ache of a healed wound, a physical memory of a past storm. Our task, our challenge, our privilege is simply to learn how to listen. To listen with whatever ears we possess, whether they are technological instruments that scan the heavens, or the intuitive senses honed by generations of deep connection to the land. We must relearn the art of paying attention, of being present to the world around us. The night is deep and still now. The story is complete. Thank you for joining us on this journey, for sitting with us by this fire and listening to the tales of the storm. We hope this story has sparked something in you, a new way of seeing the world, a new way of listening to the sky. If these stories have moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to keep the fire burning and to continue exploring these profound connections between humanity and the natural world. Share this journey with someone you think might need to hear it. And until we meet again, remember to listen closely. You are under Baobab skies.